Russian President Vladimir Putin has promised to rapidly improve living standards in the country. In his State of the Nation address, Putin said too many Russians were living in poverty. He pledged a number of measures he said would boost living conditions within a year. Now, those policies include tax breaks and increasing payments to young families. A recent report found approval ratings for the Russian president have fallen sharply. DW correspondent Errol Tilton is in Moscow and he joins me now from there. Now, this State of the Nation address is always highly anticipated, Aaron. What are some of the key points of Putin's address so far?
Well, so far, Putin has focused purely on issues that influence the Russian pocketbook. Basically, he was focusing on the fact that there's a lot of popular dissent throughout the nation right now, where a lot of people are feeling that they are paying for some of the follies that the Russian government has engaged in. Real wages are dropping, the economy is stagnant, and at the end of the month, a lot of Russians feel they don't just have as much money left over, and that's resulted, as you were saying, in falling support for Putin. And that's really what he's been focusing on this year. And it's a marked change, of course, to the more martial rhetoric that we heard last year during the same speech.
Less than a year ago, Putin was re-elected with a large majority, Aaron, but since then, his approval ratings have slumped. Why is that?
Well, as we were just discussing, it's primarily part of the economic hardships that many Russians feel that they're confronted with. I've been talking to people here on the streets, and they're saying in the last 4 years, they've seen their wages drop. They've seen, because of the sanctions, the economy really stagnant. They can't get as many products as they used to, and they really feel like they're being asked to tighten their economic belts to the point where, as one person told me, they're starting to bleed. Now, that's really kind of resulted in this wave of falling popularity. Also contributing to that was a deeply unpopular pension reform, which saw the largest protests against Putin's power since 2012. And a lot of that economic hardship is also spilling over into the financial industry. And I believe my colleague Mio Drag-Sorge was just out filming a report on how the banking industry is reacting to the stagnant economy.
Pramsvyazbank and Okrytia are just two of the financial institutions that Russia's central bank has stepped in to save. Decisions that cost millions. Further losses could be on the horizon. Reports suggest that some 150 banks in the country are on the brink of collapse. Lack of capital is a major problem. The central bank maintains strict oversight of the small and medium-sized financial institutions, but it's more lenient towards the big banks. They adopt the principle of too big to fail. The central bank traditionally intervenes to prevent the demise of major banks. Smaller, privately owned financial institutions are more likely to lose their licenses if they're too low on cash. The system of regulation and supervision aims to promote competition. Strict oversight encourages competition. The reality on the ground, however, is that state-owned banks are increasingly lending to state-owned companies. The effect of all this is to dampen economic growth. Western sanctions, which make it hard for Russian banks to access international markets, have compounded the problem. The reality is that we're in the midst of a recession. It's not Western sanctions that are the cause. They simply make the situation worse. The country's increasingly shaky financial institutions are causing people to lose faith in the system. Recent surveys suggest that 1 in 3 Russians believe they're best off not parking their money in the bank.
So, Aaron, as we said, Putin's support has slumped in recent months. Did Putin say anything in his address today which could help him win back the confidence of voters?
That really is the question. I mean, these promises, these economic promises, will actually be quite expensive, and Russia's economy is in rather dire straits. As we heard there, it's in a recession. The low oil prices are really hurting the Russian budget. You have to remember, this is ostensibly a petrol state, and low commodity prices are really something that the Russian economy has a hard time dealing with. So really the question is, how much real-world help will most Russians actually feel by the end of the year. And that's anyone's guess. I mean, Russia has had a habit of making these promises in the past. Putin is as well. And they haven't necessarily resulted into real-world economic change. So it's one of those situations. They're going to have to play the long game and see how much real-world economic help actually arrives on the doorsteps of your average everyday Russian.
And briefly, Aaron, what about a possible successor? Are there any candidates in the wings who might want to replace him?
Short answer, no. Long answer, also probably no. You have to remember, Putin's next term will actually go to 2024. And if you believe the rumor mill, he has no intention of giving up power in the near future. Of course, the Constitution wouldn't allow that. But as we've seen in the past with the trick they pulled with Medvedev 8 years ago, anything is possible here in Russia. So right now, the message Putin is bringing to the people is stay with me if you want to have long-term economic success like we enjoyed back in the early 2000s.
Right, Aaron Tilton in Moscow, thank you very much for that.